Hello, everybody, and welcome to my YouTube channel. If you're not familiar with me or my work, my name is Jason Wagasback. I am the author of the book Rise and Fall of the 80s Toon Empire. My book is a history of the television animation boom that took place in the 1980s. More specifically, it goes into the weekday afternoon and morning shows. Many, if you're around my age, if you're in your say 40s, then you probably know a lot about these different shows. I'm talking about He-Man. I'm talking about She-Ra. I'm talking about Transformers, ThunderCats, GI Joe, Voltron, and so many others. Gem, My Little Pony, Inspector Gadget, Mask, Robotech, Silverhawks. I also go into the behind the scenes look into many of these different cartoons and also look at the overall state of the market. I look at why there was such an explosion in these cartoons and what sustained it, what drove it, and also ultimately what happened when the market crashed in the late 80s and why many of these shows disappeared from the airwaves. So you're probably wondering, what would it motivate somebody to invest so much time and effort to writing 300 pages plus about 1980s cartoons? Well, I had grown up in the 80s. I had grown up with He-Man and She-Ra and Transformers and Silverhawks, and then later on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, DuckTales, the Disney Afternoon, all that stuff. And all those cartoons came on in the afternoons or sometimes in the mornings on my local TV station. Sometimes like channel 38, channel 26. You just click the remote at a certain time in the afternoon, and there those shows were. But by 2000, that had all changed. Those shows were gone. And I was thinking one day, I realized, when you turn on the TV on those same time slots, what do you get? You get judge shows, you get sitcom reruns of Two and a Half Men or The Big Bang Theory. What had happened to cause that something that was such a part of mine and millions of other people's childhoods, what had caused all that to just vanish? So I decided to go ahead and do some research. Let's poke around on the internet, look through some old newspaper articles, and maybe see if I could find some answers. And it wasn't long before I came up with enough material for probably, I'd say, an article. I figured, you know what, I'll just write this up as a blog post, post it on the internet, and then I'll be done. What happened was I began looking at some old trade magazines. These are talking about the Hollywood trades, the magazines that talk about what's going on in the movies, what's going on television, all the behind the scenes stuff. And so I began looking at those, and then the story, if you will, just kept growing more and more. I found out more information. What was starting off as a small article began to get really, really big. And then I realized after a while, you know what? I've got enough material here for a whole book. And so went on, did more research, built the thing up, tried to organize it into a full story, into a full book. Well, after a while, this material got so big that I realized I have multiple books here. I'm going to have to trim off perhaps the first half of this and turn it into its own story. Now, how in the world did I crystallize this into its own story? I have to give credit to J. Michael Straczynski. Since I was a teenager, I've had his book on screenwriting. It's called The Complete Book of Script Writing. He's released several editions. I don't know if he's done any recent updates of it recently. But in his book, he talked about his time as a scriptwriter for He-Man. And he also went into detail a little bit about the 80s cartoon market at the time, and he specifically talked about this glut of cartoons, how they built up on television, how all these producers kept making all these different shows until one day, about, let's say, 1987, I think that's what he said, the whole market just kind of collapsed. The market just couldn't handle all these different shows, and that was something that always stuck in my head. And I realized, let's tell the story about that. And that's what led into Rise and Fall of the 80s Toon Empire. I've also been fascinated with books that go into behind the scenes of Hollywood, talk about different movies, TV shows. Sometimes, yeah, books that talk about whole studios. And one of my favorite books is called The Gross. It's from Peter Bart. It talks about the movie slate that came out in 1998. That was when the movies like The Truman Show came out. That was when Armageddon, Deep Impact, Godzilla, and it was a very fascinating look at what was going on from Hollywood's point of view, from the point of view of the studios, producers, and so forth. So that's something that I've always been wanting to do for a while. And also, I drew inspiration from books about wrestling. I got a book called The Death of WCW. This is about, chronicles the decline of World Championship Wrestling, and it's kind of the whole blow by blow about what was going over there, how WCW became this incredible juggernaut, and then just went downhill from there. And that was something else that kind of stuck with me. I thought, yeah, I could do something similar about the 1980s weekday cartoon market. And in general, there just wasn't a whole lot of behind the scenes material about the 1980s cartoon boom. Most of what I found was just old newspaper articles or trade magazine articles, things like that. There wasn't a lot of books about the subject. Every now and then you'd see books about a specific show, like He-Man, for example, or Voltron. You'd have books that just focus on a single cartoon. And I thought, wouldn't it be very helpful to have one book that kind of took a bird's eye view of the whole 80s tune market? And so that's another reason I thought, hey, this might be a pretty good idea. In future videos, I want to get into more how I researched this book, how I wrote it, how I put it all together. As some of my reviewers have noted, this book is pretty detailed. It was definitely not very easy to do. It requires a whole lot of butt in chair time, whole lot of reading, whole lot of thinking about how to piece this thing together. In fact, I sometimes refer to this book as putting together the world's biggest jigsaw puzzle. And if you're curious at all about buying a copy of my cartoon book, I want to give you a fair warning. My book does not contain any screen caps of any of the cartoons I talk about. So if you are into cartoon books for their illustrations, I'm sorry, I will be disappointing you, at least on that front. But my book does contain a lot of text and narrative and story to it. So hopefully, at least on that front, I have been able to deliver for you. My book is currently available on Amazon.com in both Kindle and paperback formats. You can also get a copy through Barnes & Noble. You can also get one through Walmart, and you can find copies on eBay. Since my book is self-published, it isn't available in many or probably any store at the moment, but if you look around online, it should be pretty easy to buy a copy. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you'll come by again for future videos.